The cafe always smelled the same: rich roasted coffee, fresh bread, and something softer underneath, like comfort itself. It was the kind of place where people came not just to eat, but to feel human again. Outside, snow fell in thick, quiet waves, covering the world in a cold silence. But inside, there was warmth, not just from the heaters, but from the low hum of conversation, clinking cups, and life moving forward. Daniel Hayes sat alone at his usual corner table by the window. He stared at the frost creeping across the glass, tracing patterns that never lasted long. He came here often, not for the food, but for something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was peace, maybe it was memory. 2 years ago, his wife had left for work on a snowy morning just like this, and never came back. A car accident, they said. Instant, clean. But grief was never clean. It lingered, heavy and cold, settling into the quiet corners of his life. Since then, Daniel had been living more out of habit than purpose. The cafe was one of the few places where the silence didn't feel so loud. He wrapped his hands around his cup, letting the warmth seep into his fingers, when a small, trembling voice broke through his thoughts. "Can I sit here?" Daniel looked up. Standing beside his table was a woman, her posture hesitant but steady enough to suggest she had already been told no too many times today. In her arms, she held a small boy, maybe 3 years old, bundled tightly against the cold. Her name, he would soon learn, was Grace Mitchell. Her eyes told a story before she even spoke another word. They were tired, deeply tired, but not empty. There was still something there, something holding on. Daniel nodded quietly. Of course. She sat down slowly, almost cautiously, as if the chair might be taken away from her at any moment. The boy shifted in her arms, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of curiosity and hunger. That's when Daniel noticed the details. Her beige coat was worn thin, the fabric frayed at the edges from too many winters. It had once been nice, he thought, but time had taken its toll. The boy's jacket, bright blue, was zipped all the way up to his chin, but his mittens, they didn't match. One was gray, the other was brown. It was a small thing, almost nothing, but somehow it stayed with him. The waitress approached, her expression polite but firm. "You'll need to order something if you'd like to stay." Grace nodded quickly, her voice soft. "Of course, we're just deciding." But Daniel could see it, the hesitation, the quiet panic. She wasn't deciding, she was calculating, counting what little she had. Before she could say another word, Daniel gently pushed a plate of croissants towards her. "If you sit," he said, his voice calm and kind, "you have to eat too." Grace froze for a moment, clearly unsure whether to accept. Pride and need wrestled silently in her expression. Then slowly she nodded. "Thank you." The boy, Lucas, didn't hesitate. The moment the plate was within reach, his small hands grabbed a croissant and he began to eat with a kind of pure joy that made Daniel's chest tighten. It wasn't just hunger, it was relief. Grace watched him, her lips pressed together as if holding back something deeper. Then, quietly, she began to speak. She hadn't planned to, that much was obvious, but sometimes when someone shows you kindness without asking questions, the truth slips out. She had lost her job 2 weeks ago, cleaning offices at night. It wasn't much, but it had been enough. Enough to keep a roof over their heads, enough to get by. Now the rent was overdue. The landlord had given her until the end of the week. She had tried the shelters. Every single one was full. "I didn't come here to ask for anything," she said softly, almost apologetically. "I just needed somewhere warm for him, just for a little while." Daniel listened. Really listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He just sat there, letting her words exist without judgment. And something inside him, something that had been frozen for a long time, shifted. Over the next few weeks, the cafe became their place. It wasn't planned, it just happened. Grace would come in during the colder parts of the day, Lucas bundled up beside her. Daniel would already be there, or he'd arrived not long after. They would share small meals, quiet conversations, and something that slowly began to resemble connection. Lucas started calling him Mr. Dan. The first time it happened, Daniel felt something break open inside him, not painfully, but gently, like ice beginning to melt. He helped Grace where he could, filling out forms, making calls, trying to find resources. It wasn't much, but it was something, and she never asked for more than she needed. That's what struck him the most. She didn't want pity, she just wanted a chance. But still, there was something he couldn't stop thinking about. The mittens. Every time he saw them, he felt like they meant something more, like they were a piece of a story he didn't yet understand. One evening, as the snow fell heavier than usual, Daniel made a decision. I have a spare room, and I could use some help around the house. Nothing complicated, just keeping things in order. Grace looked at him surprised. I'm not offering charity, he added quickly. It would be work, fair pay, just a start. For a moment she didn't respond. Then her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. Thank you, she whispered. A few days later he helped her move what little she had. It wasn't much, a couple of bags, some clothes, a few personal items, the kind of life you can pack up in less than an hour. As they settled in, Daniel found himself organizing space in the spare room when he came across a small handmade box tucked carefully into one of the bags. He hesitated. It wasn't his to open, but something about it, the care with which it had been kept, made him curious. When Grace returned to the room, he gestured towards it and asked, "What's this?" She froze, just for a second. Then she walked over, picked up the box, and opened it slowly. Inside were mittens, matching ones. A gray pair, a brown pair. Daniel frowned slightly. I don't understand. Why doesn't Lucas wear these? Grace's eyes filled again, but this time the emotion was different. It was at the shelter, she said quietly, before we stopped going. She took a breath. There was another mother there. Her son didn't have any mittens at all. His hands were always red from the cold. Daniel stayed silent. I had 2 pairs, she continued, softly, so I gave him one of each pair. That way, both boys would have something. She smiled faintly, though her voice trembled. I figured it's better for 2 children to have warm hands than for one to have matching ones. Daniel couldn't speak. All this time, he had thought he was the one helping her, fixing things, offering stability. But standing there, looking at those mittens, he realized something much deeper. Grace hadn't just been surviving, she had been giving. Even when she had almost nothing. Even when it meant her own child would stand out, mismatched and judged, she chose kindness anyway. And in that moment, something inside Daniel finally broke free. Not in grief, but in understanding. For the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel like he was just remembering life. He felt like he was part of it again. What began as a simple question, "Can I sit here?" turned into something neither of them expected. A second chance. Not just for Grace and Lucas, but for him too. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from grand gestures or perfect solutions. Sometimes it comes from the smallest acts. A shared table, a warm meal, a pair of mismatched mittens, and the quiet, powerful reminder
that even in the coldest moments, a warm heart can change everything.